Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and this is episode 286, where we're going to be talking about finding hungry audiences in global markets. Now, whenever we're looking to serve audiences, lots of times we find ourselves looking in the same places, just with a different lens. However, sometimes it's worth looking at different places with a much different lens, especially when thinking about the global market. Thankfully, our guest today shares his experiences and insights on how to find new and hungry audiences in global markets, even if those markets have a limited industry presence and little to no government support in their region. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Yousif Almouri. Yousif, how's it going, bud? Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, man.
Yeah, definitely. And Yousif here is the founder of Fikra Events. Lots of cool things that they put on and do and organize, everything from a game expo in Kuwait to KBR, which is the Kuwait Battle Royale, which is a really cool, fun event that Yousif kindly shared some details with me prior to us talking today. But let me take a minute. Yousif, please introduce yourself. Let us know what exactly is it that you do for Fikra Events, what kind of things that you have. I mean, because I know there is so much you're involved with. Would love to hear what you do. And on top of that, when you're not so busy with all these cool and fun and exciting events, what do you do in your spare time? What kind of fun activities do you do to unplug or maybe just replug in a different way?
All right, sure. First of all, thank you for having me as a guest. I appreciate it. So my name is Yousif Almouri, and I'm the founder of a company called Fikra, which is actually the word idea in Arabic. So we're based in Kuwait. We're an Arab, in the Middle East, Arab-based company, and the whole idea of the company is to promote gaming activities, regardless of what they are. It doesn't even have to be events. Anything gaming in Kuwait, because as a gamer, like I grew up with games, and all my friends are gamers, and I got to know my friends from games and etc. We're like all hardcore gamers, but there has never been representation for video game companies in the Middle East in general. No local offices, no localization, no official distribution, etc. So I thought, with a bunch of my friends, that hey, let's create a company to promote the Middle East as a market for video games. And since we didn't have any money or experience or connections, whatever, we thought the best route to do that is by creating video game events, by saying, hey, look at this foot traffic that we have in these events. Imagine what would happen if you guys came and supported the market officially for like all these various video game companies. So that's what we do at Fikra. Is organize gaming events, whether it's expos, esports, cosplay contests, orchestras, video game orchestras, art contests, whatever. Whatever you do in any other event in Japan, in Europe, in America, we do just the same thing here in Kuwait, and we've been going on for 10 plus years, and yeah, that's like the quick intro for the company Fikra.
Cool. And yeah, definitely doing a lot of stuff. And it's just really neat that it's not even just specifically, like one type of event. It's just numerous things around the whole concept and idea of games, essentially,
Correct.
which is so awesome. I mean, I love being a part of the ones that I'm able to go to myself that are local to me. But just the fact that you're doing this and that these things are happening is just, I don't know. I always get excited. So thank you for sharing those details. And also, a little curious to learn a little bit more about you in terms of when you're not doing all these fun things, what kind of things do you do in your personal life when you're either relaxing or maybe not. Maybe you're just playing lots of games on top of doing all
Well,
this.
like I said, I'm a gamer. Gaming is my number one hobby. It's always been my number one hobby. It will be my number one hobby till I die. As we're recording this, God of War just came out, so I'm playing that right now.
While we're talking,
Yeah,
folks.
gaming is my escape, is my relaxation. So I love to play a lot of games, and then sometimes I'll also play co-op games or party games with my friends and so on. But other than gaming, I love cooking. I do
Ah.
actually a lot of barbecues with my friends.
Hmm.
Um, I like to I just like to do whatever. Like I'm not like in one category of things that I do. Like I'll play board games, I'll watch movies, play video games, start cooking, racing, etc. Like I'll do whatever that's fun, basically.
Nice. Oh, that's so good. And it's like it sounds like you just find a lot of fun in just about everything you do,
Yeah,
which is
as long as with my friends, I'm having fun, basically.
oh, nice. Well, thank you for sharing that with us because that's it's cool to hear that and everything. But what I also want to do though is like learn a little bit more about you by
Okay.
putting you into the Q box round.
All
And
right.
for those of you who are just joining us or not familiar, it's just a series of random questions we've prepared here for Yousif today. So, Yousif, are you ready for the Q box round?
Let's do this.
All right. Um, what is one person you have always wanted to meet, and they could be alive or dead?
Is this in the video game industry or just like in general?
In general.
Well, in general, Howard Hughes,
Okay.
because I'm a big flying person.
Nice.
I've actually I wanted to be a pilot in the Air Force, but I can't because I'm an only child. It's illegal.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So Howard Hughes is like a big, inspiration for me. But if it's within the gaming world, it's definitely Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario.
Ah, okay, cool. All right, so that's a good segue to my next question is what's your favorite video game character of all time?
Man, that is really hard because I'm not really attached to characters as I am attached to franchises, if that makes
Ah, okay,
sense.
yep.
Like I love Metal Gear, but I wouldn't necessarily say I love Solid Snake, if that makes sense. I love the Mario games, but I don't necessarily like Mario as a character. Um, so it's really hard. I mean, my favorite franchise of all time is Zelda. So like the easy answer should be Link, but I don't know. For the purpose of this interview, let's say Solid Snake.
Okay. I will take that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, here's another one that's probably going to be a tough one for you in light of uh,
Okay.
the types of things you do. If you could only use one character from any fighting game, but you would have to use them for an eternity, who would it be?
Well, that's actually kind of easy because one of my favorite characters is Ken from Street Fighter.
Ah, okay.
And I always play Ken, in whatever new Street Fighter game comes out. My second is Cammy, but my main is Ken. So I guess I would say Ken for this answer.
Nice. Okay, cool. All right, this one's kind of a given. I think you kind of already answered it without really knowing it, but Final Fantasy or Zelda?
I mean, I'm a big Zelda nerd. I mean, it's my favorite game of all time. I love Final Fantasy, but I mean, it's Zelda. I can't turn my back on Zelda. It's my number one franchise for like 30 plus years now. So
And that makes sense for that choice. And man, it's like, okay, well, you already answered this before. So and this is a staple here on the show, but what game are you playing right now? So we know it's God of War. So what other
and
game?
yeah, and Mario Rabbids, which just came
Ah,
out the
yes, it did. My son's been
week
bugging me
previous,
forever about that.
right? Because I love strategy games. So that's definitely one of the reasons I got it. and I also got Bayonetta 3, but I still
Yep.
haven't played it.
Okay.
I was busy the past month with organizing another event, so I didn't really have a lot of time to play. But I missed a couple of games I definitely want to play, which is Field Chronicles, which is another strategy game,
Mm.
and then Tactics Ogre, which is coming
Yes,
out
that's right.
2 days after the taping of this interview. One of my favorite games of all time, Tactics Ogre. It's a remaster. And then you have Final Fantasy Crisis Core, which is the remake coming out in December. But yeah, for the next week or so, it's going to be Tactics Ogre and God of War.
I think you're the only guest that's been on the show that actually had, it's like, okay, not only answered the question before we became, addressed the question, but then had a whole additional lineup. Like,
Like I said, I'm a hardcore gamer.
it's awesome.
It's my number one hobby.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing the answers to those questions. And yeah, they were definitely catered a little bit. I didn't know how much of a gamer you were. I had a good sense of that because of previous conversations, but these questions worked out just right. So, anyways,
Great.
all right, folks. Well, we're going to get right into the meat of the discussion here because there's a lot of cool and interesting things that we want to talk about. And as I mentioned earlier in the introduction of the show, is that we're going to be talking about, finding hungry audiences on unexpected places. So to kind of kick this off, and also a little context, what we're doing here today is because of the work that Yousif has done specifically with Kuwait and stuff, we're taking this kind of a broad idea, but really focusing it out with some really cool and key examples that Yousif has based off his experiences and other things. So, Yousif, to kick this off, gaming in general has become like a global culture, and it continues to grow annually. We all know this. However,
Right.
despite this growth, why do you feel that the industry continues to only focus on key global territories?
Well, you want like the politically correct answer or just the real answer?
You can give us both, however you think aligns and such.
Honestly, they're just being idiots. They just see where their vision is. Like they don't see outside of their peripheral vision.
Hmm.
They just see where they are, where they live, and they think that's it. That's enough. They're not aware of what's happening around the world. They have a big misconception of other countries, not just the Middle East, like other countries outside of Japan, Europe, and America, and it's a huge untapped market. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all humans. We like the same stuff.
Right.
There's nothing that a Kuwaiti likes that an American wouldn't, or vice versa. I mean, we share the same likes and dislikes. But it's just really a sense of just people stuck in their lane, really,
Mm.
and not trying to go outside of that lane because they might see like language being a barrier or like the culture being a barrier. So like, you know what? I'm happy. I'm content with what I have, with what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna stay here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think those are all really great reasons, and I think some of us might be thinking too at face value, like, okay, well, there could be population, obviously, too, right? Like a large number of people, and obviously that's always gonna like be the case. Like a lot of these focuses and stuff lie in numbers too, and concentrations, and all these other things too. But that's not to say, but again, to your main point, it's also having that mindset too can be very limiting, especially when we're talking about like a global culture here, a global economy, especially as it relates to the industry. I mean, but I just want to address that in case like anybody's like, well, this country is so much bigger than a lot of other countries. Well, yes, that can be the case, but there's lots more to it than just that.
Right, right.
Cool. Well, no, I think that's a great place to kind of position our conversation moving forward too, because like as you kind of outlined a little bit in terms of people wanting to stay in their lane, companies or whoever that might be, there's obviously times where there's going to be some obstacles that studios face, or even companies, when they're entering untapped audiences.
Right.
So, in light of this, I was thinking, what do you think are some of the initial concerns that studios or companies have when they enter global markets such as Kuwait?
Oh, I can give you very specific scenarios because I've worked with various companies, large and small, over the past 10 plus years, and honestly, each region or each country has like their own set of fears or expectations. So, for example, the Japanese companies. When I talk to them about coming and exhibiting in our expo called GX,
Hmm.
their number one fear was the language, that they would show a game not localized in Arabic. But then my answer to them is, we never had games in Arabic in the first place, so it doesn't matter. Like, that's how neglected we are, that there's no
Oh,
localization. I mean, now it's happening, that the past couple of years, more and more games have been localized. Like I said, I was playing God of War. I checked the settings. It's in Arabic. It's localized into Arabic.
mm,
um so more games are being translated into Arabic, but back then there wasn't. So the fact that they would exhibit their games in Japanese, even not even English, in Japanese, didn't matter to us,
mm.
because we never had the option of Arabic. So I told them that this fear of, like, lack of localization is not a fear, because it just doesn't happen. European and American companies, um, th- their problem was they were afraid of the culture, in the sense of, oh, well, what do Arabs like to play? We like to play what you guys like to play. So it's not that hard. And the other big one was the sales of games,
Mm. Yeah.
because okay, so recently we have people using like Kuwaiti accounts for like PSN, but historically speaking, almost I'm going to talk about Kuwait, but it also applies to the region overall.
Hmm.
Me personally, and every single friend that I have, we all have USPSN accounts. So you could say officially sales in Kuwait are like zero for a specific game, but in reality it's high, because no one uses their Kuwait account. Say officially sales are zero, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, and backing up real quick, you're saying USPN, so like US PlayStation Network. You guys have United States, an
Yeah.
American PlayStation account. So any of the sales that you guys are contributing to is going right into the US market.
Oh, and let me add to that. In 2013, I had a meeting with Sony PlayStation UK, and they were about to launch PlayStation Middle East.
Mm.
And I was talking to them, and I was bringing this point up because this was like one of the biggest barriers that I had, because anytime I went to a company saying, "Hey, you guys should exhibit in Kuwait," they're like, "Well, show us the sales," and I can't. Um, so I was telling Sony this, and they said, "Oh, we are well aware of this." I mean, Kuwait is a small country, but Saudi Arabia is one of the bigger countries, in the Middle East, population wise. And they actually, this is information directly from PlayStation. They said that based on the number of US PSN accounts in Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia is like the fifth largest US states by PSN accounts. So that means the number of US PSN accounts in Saudi Arabia, just Saudi Arabia by itself, is like as high as people in New York and Texas.
That's crazy.
So
That's
that shows you how the majority of the countries in the Middle East use foreign, like US or European accounts, because, well, for example, for PlayStation, uh, they did have Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and other countries as an option back, when they first launched, but the stores were unsupported. Even Arabic language was broken, in the sense that it didn't even display correctly on the stores.
mm.
So why would I put my country as Kuwait, and there's only like 10% of the selection of games on that store?
Yeah. It's
You
yeah,
know?
exactly.
And then Nintendo, we don't even exist in Nintendo. So
Oh.
for sure, anybody who has a Nintendo account is a US account or a European account for sure. And then Xbox has support, but it's kind of similar to Sony. Like they had it, but they didn't really do anything with it until like a couple of years ago. So people say, okay, well, just make a Kuwait account now. I'm like, yeah, you want me to give up all my trophies and achievements
Yeah,
and
right?
games I bought over like 10 years and my friend list and stuff? No way.
Yeah.
You
So
know?
it's
Yeah.
I find this really interesting because here we are talking about obstacles that like studios and audiences and audiences face, right? And what you're laying out here with some really good examples are how players are actually becoming really creative. Especially, it's probably more accessible now than before, but creative in creating like a U.S. account or a European-based account, right?
Right.
And what's really interesting though is how you outline that the obstacles or maybe some of these concerns that these businesses and companies have are not even really a concern because of how the markets have been all along. It's like, hey, like Kuwaitis are like, I want to play games, and if they're only in English, so be it. I'm gonna learn English or just play the game, and I'm just gonna do what I love to do, right? But
Exactly.
everybody's
Exactly.
thinking like, oh, but they're in another country. They're not gonna know English. It's like if they want it, they'll do it.
I mean, you can see based on my accent. Yeah, I speak fluent English, but I also speak fluent Arabic because I grew up with English media, movies, games,
Mm.
etc. So I learned through that, and it's true for my friends as well. But yeah, like just as an example, Super Nintendo, mine was an American system because there is no such thing as a Middle Eastern version of like Super Nintendo back in the 90s.
Yep.
And same thing for N64, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, Sega Genesis, Mega Drive, depending on your region, Dreamcast. We never had regional systems. We bought the US version, and specifically the US version because I don't know if you remember this, Andrew, but back, in the Asian days of the gaming industry in the 80s and 90s, it was very slow for games to release outside of Japan, and then even
Oh, yep.
extra slow to release in Europe. So the best option for us to play a game in English was to buy the US one because US would get the games before Europe does.
Yep. Yep. No,
So
I do
that's
remember that.
why
Yep.
even though geographically we are closer to Europe, most of us have US stuff because all our past games is based on US from the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. It's it's just so crazy how these these global markets how they change and shift and kind of like almost dictate these things to the point where I don't know if I just back up to look at what this question was like what are concerns from studios and companies. It's really funny because it's not about the concerns
No.
about the companies. It's about the concerns and obstacles that these countries like Kuwait are actually facing. And if we take a moment to look at things very differently, like just basically flip it, completely flip it, we realize that like, wait a minute, there are lots of opportunities right under our noses, and the things that we always think about that, yes, in a lot of cases are important, but like localization and so many other factors like, oh, culturally, does this align and everything else? But at the end of the day, these are all things, while still important to have and be have empathy towards, we also forget the fact that like, hey, based off of this history and how the industry was, we don't necessarily need to worry so much about that, but should still be important to be mindful of.
Correct.
So
And I would like to mention something. Do you know the place called Akihabara in Japan?
I do. I've actually been there myself.
Nice. I've been there as well. We actually in Kuwait
Oh, hold
have
on.
our
Keep that thought. For those of you who
okay.
don't know or aren't familiar with Akihabara, it is a location like a section in Japan, like in the greater Tokyo area, which is basically I think it's translates to electric town, but it's basically
Correct.
like
you can get everything, gadgets, electronics, and they have
It's gamer's
crap tons of
paradise.
video games, like everything gaming related. It's a yeah. You said a gamer's paradise. So I'm sorry.
Correct.
Continue.
Yeah. No, no problem. So we have our own Akihabara in Kuwait. That's how strong and healthy the gaming market is in Kuwait. It's basically I mean, obviously, it's not as big as the one in Japan because Japan is like a whole town. Ours is just regulated to like a mall, but it's like a mall that's only game shops and gaming merchandise. And that's always the first place I take any guest or company that comes to Kuwait and visits my events. That's the first place I take them. And as soon as I take them there, they're like, "Okay, Yousif, you don't need to explain anything anymore. You don't need to talk anymore. We understand."
Yeah, it's great, and I know we've talked before, like when we first initially met, we
Right.
had some similar conversations too. And this one's calling back and share this. Well, when I bring it up, if you don't mind, but like sometimes you had some people attending your event, some other companies, and you're like going around like how many copies of this game you have, and asking even players like how many copies of this particular game do you have? Like, what's that response like when you're asking these questions to kind of show these companies like how excited and devoted these gamers are?
Man, I mean, they're always shocked. Like, for example, I had Square Enix, attend my events. They chose my event to be the first event that they attend in the Middle East, and they literally thought that, okay, yeah, they know that there's a gaming market and it's healthy and strong and stuff, but they really had a fear that they didn't really have a big fan base as they thought they should or would. And I'm like, you guys have Final Fantasy. Like, everybody loves Final Fantasy, you know? Like, how can you think no one's going to care about Final Fantasy? So when one of the Final Fantasy producers came to my event, he had a continuous line of people wanting to take pictures and autographs with him throughout the 3 days of the event that was like nonstop. And he was just in shock that, people were bringing him copies of, like, I will never forget this. He because he is specifically the producer of the City of Final Fantasy, the fighting game.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not really involved in, like, like, let's say Final Fantasy 7 or 5. I mean, he wasn't even in the company at that time even. And he told me people would bring him copies of Final Fantasy 4, Final Fantasy 5, like stuff on Super Nintendo for him to sign. Even though he had nothing to do with them, because it was like the first time these companies attend, and they were just like thirsty for someone from like a company like Square Enix to come and interact with them, basically.
Yeah, and it's just really interesting to see that, like, not necessarily interesting, right? I don't think for most of us in general would see it as a surprise of so much, like, people in general like having an extreme like passion or loyalty to some of these IPs and such. But then when you're seeing it in a level with some of these, I would say maybe misconceptions we were talking about before, then it I think becomes very surprising to a degree. And not to mention that, like, even for more business related type stuff too. I mean, when you're talking about people that are so devoted and infatuated almost with this type of, with these games and everything else,
Right.
I mean, you got to start considering, okay, maybe the market, okay, maybe Kuwait is only as big as Texas or, New York. By the way, folks, for those of you who aren't familiar, New York, Texas, California, in the United States, those are basically their own giant economies that can be compared with other countries in the world. So the fact that when you said before that's number 5 in contributing to,
Right.
that's not the states but is based off of those numbers, that's a pretty big deal. But when you're talking about those types of numbers and this type of devotion, I mean, then it might become a question of, okay, what's the lifetime value of these types of customers in terms of other geolocations and such? So these types of things, especially the ones that you're sharing, and I'm sure that are happening, in other places in the world, really start to question, like, okay, what does this really look like, even from other opportunities and things like that? And if you even boil it down to business terms, it's like, well, what if the lifetime value is like 300% greater than it is in these other areas? Like, those are all things to be held into, that should be accounted for, at least considered a little bit. And I think it's just so interesting to hear these stories and how this is happening in different parts of the world, especially Kuwait, where it's like, again, like you said, these people are thirsty. They're hungry for more games. So,
Right. I mean, we always will be.
yeah. So let's shift things a little bit here, and because we kind of got tapped into some of this, and I want to kind of dive in a little bit further in terms of like, just in general. Okay, we already have some ideas on how studios or companies or whoever can benefit from these kind of like untapped audiences, so to speak. They're not necessarily untapped, but they are in a, let's say, a more direct fashion. So though the demands are super high for this, we can understand how there are not so much different types of obstacles that people will face. But keeping that in mind, what would you say should studios be mindful of when they're looking to serve game-hungry audiences, and let's just say especially gamers in Kuwait? Is there anything that they should be mindful of if looking to, better serve certain audiences where the industry isn't present?
Actually, I love this question because it's such an easy answer for me. Just acknowledge us. That's all we ask for. What I mean, what do I mean by that? We're not expecting, for you guys to translate your games into Arabic, at least for now. But if you maybe, when a new game launches, maybe on your Twitter account, when you guys say, hey, our game is available now, maybe in addition to that tweet, you can have like a tweet in Arabic to acknowledge that you have like an Arabic fan base. So like in Arabic, you tweet out, this game is available right now, but in Arabic, for example. These little steps go a long way in establishing trust and loyalty from the gamers, because then we say, oh, look, these guys do know we exist. They are aware of us. So because, I always laugh when, especially back in the day when they say, oh, global launch. Global launch meant US, Europe, and Japan. Let's be honest.
Right. Yeah.
That's not global. So that's key market launch, not global launch. So stuff like that, like tweeting in Arabic, acknowledging, you have fans in the region. I mean, it's a first step, but it's a good first step. And then, it can evolve from there into like, localizing into Arabic, into maybe doing like a launch party in the Middle East for, said game and so on and that kind of stuff. But just acknowledgement is the key thing.
Yeah. And it's so funny because I think the reason why I find this funny is because, and folks, for those of you that have listened to the show over a long course of the time, or just in even little spots, a big theme that we're very focused on is empathy, right? And I know that, like, and while I think it's always important to lead with empathy and be mindful of these things, at the same time, what we're finding out here in this case, and probably in a lot of other cases with other countries that don't have this type of representation in the industry or presence or whatever, is that we might find that leading a certain way isn't as empathetic as we would like it to be, right? But it's just looking at it with a different lens. It's not to say don't have empathy or whatever, but it's not saying like you have to. And I take this with a grain of salt, because I know some other episodes we've had where we talk detailed about this, but it's not so much to the degree where you have to hire like a cultural consultant about like a certain area. Can you do that? Is it worthwhile? Is it good to do those types of things? Of course it is, but it doesn't mean you have to go through all that trouble to do so. So that's what I wanted to call out, that I think is so interesting in this, because we're so, especially as I said, thematically throughout the whole podcast, it's those types of things we do talk about in some detail, but in this case, it's a little bit different. So I don't know. I just find that stuff really interesting. How, like, I don't know, all of this is just getting like flipped upside down to stuff, and it's always good to talk about these things because.
Can I
Yeah, go ahead.
On something you just said about the cultural sensitivity? I mean, obviously, there's always going to be cultural sensitivities because, and especially when we as people are different. What might not be sensitive to me might be sensitive to someone else. But generally speaking, like let's say Call of Duty or first-person shooters, like half the time the bad guys are Arabs, but we play them all the time. So we never play those games and say, oh, those white people hate us or something. We don't think that way, So I honestly, anytime I hear a game company say, we hired like a cultural expert or whatever, I cringe because I feel like they're going to do more harm than good, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's an interesting perspective to think of it this way, and I'll share my example and how it probably relates, and you can probably add to how it relates to you too, because I know we talked about this before in our initial conversation when we basically first met. I remember forever ago, there's a French film of mine that I absolutely loved, but I only got the movie that was already dubbed. And I hate watching movies that are dubbed. I hate it. I always like to watch the original language.
By the way.
What?
And sorry, you cut off for like 20 seconds. You cut off.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I think we get spotty. So apology, folks, if you hear us cutting out a little bit, but I think we're still good. But yeah, so with that movie, though, like I anytime when I watched it many years later, I could only watch it dubbed because that's how I was used to it. I tried watching it with the French, the original French, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I just, nope, switching back to dub. But anything else, I refuse dub. I hate it. But I know in your case, it's kind of similar. You grew up with these games from the 90s and moving forward that they were just done a certain way, and that's what you were familiar with. That's what you liked. That's what you enjoyed. Yes. And then when they start really tweaking it, it's like, well, this is no longer that childhood memory I have of the games and moving forward. And that's cool. It's okay. So it's like, and again, it's always one of those things where it can be not necessarily a touchy subject, but more so of like, what is a good way to be mindful of these things and then not. And I know this will go into a whole different conversation, but I still think it's important to at least call out to those things that they don't necessarily need to happen, because be mindful of how like, and again, I know you might have your own experiences, Yousif, with this, probably a little bit better than my French film. but the fact that you grew up with these things and that's what you liked, that's what you knew, and everything else, and then to really start changing them, it feels foreign. All right. I mean, am I wrong in saying that?
No. You are 100% right. I mean, forget games. I would like to use my mom as an example. My mom, she specializes in the Arabic language because she's a lawyer. So, language is very important. And to this day, when she is, handling her phone, when she talks to me about, something that's wrong with her phone, she says, oh, do I go to settings? And she actually says the word settings in English, not in Arabic. And her phone, all the menus are in English because since she had a cell phone from 25 years ago, whatever, there was no Arabic back then in the phone. So she was used to using her cell phone in English. So even though her English is not as strong as her Arabic, when it comes to cell phone usage, she cannot operate her phone unless it's in English. So it's the same thing with me with video games. I speak fluent Arabic. I actually am one of the hats I wear in my company is I'm a translator. I do subtitles for our videos, and when I switch to Arabic in games, it looks weird to me. Even though I can understand it, it just looks weird to me. So I just quickly, after 1 minute, I switch back to English. So
yeah. So just really interesting examples of how how this can be so different from what we're typically think of or used to, especially in certain cases of this was a great example of localization. But all things to think about a little bit more, or definitely a little bit more differently. Now,
Right.
I want to kind of get back in terms of like our overall theme here on the show, and kind of the last question before we start to close here,
Okay.
about like benefiting from untapped audience. So my last one here for today is, in what ways do you think game creators and studios and whoever else can like really benefit the most from serving these hungry audiences in countries that are underrepresented by the industry?
I mean, if you wanted the business answer, it's more money for them because more sales, you know. But if you want like an answer that helps with game development is different kind of feedback from players in the region for those games. You know, maybe and the Arab players might have different feedback on a level or gameplay mechanic than a Japanese player or a American player, for example. So it's like the differences and diversity in cultural exchange and feedback is something that those developers can gain, I think, by serving the region.
Yeah, and again, it's so funny. There's no like clear, as we're discovering today in this show, especially. There's no real clear way to look at this because again, it's like even though these ideas and concepts that we're talking about here are completely flipped over, where still it's like you can still pick up other things where you drill down a little bit more into different global markets, and that would maybe reveal a little bit more different gaming cultures, if you will, and player types and behaviors and stuff, even from a global perspective. So it's just really interesting how there's just so many different layers, and they're all like swapping around. But I guess the best way to look at this is nothing is ever as we either assume or it seems to be.
Yes, yes,
So
you're correct.
okay, good. So I love that take on it and everything, and how what are other ways that people can really benefit from these really really hungry audiences.
But Andrew, can I just say something? It's a subject that I really would like to talk about and mention before we finish,
Hmm.
which is um, the lack of support for the gaming industry from within Kuwait and outside of Kuwait, and how it's affecting us.
Mm.
So because it touches on the various questions that you mentioned. So I always tell people, like when people ask me like what are your obstacles, you know, like personally as you know my own business, I have two obstacles. One is inside of Kuwait and one is outside of Kuwait. So outside of Kuwait, we kind of mentioned it that the companies are just not aware of the market, and it's a struggle to convince them that hey, we have a big market, etc., and you guys should come, blah 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 blah. But the second obstacle, which is also a big one, is the lack of support and initiative from the country itself. And when I say country, I don't necessarily just mean the government. I mean the government is lacking in gaming initiatives, whether it's supporting esports or game developers or whatnot, but also the people themselves, the culture. Like when I started my work 10 plus years ago, my own family was making fun of me, like, oh, why are you doing video game stuff? It's like for kids. They don't understand it.
Yeah.
So I mean, over time, it got a little bit better, and I've been able to do a lot of achievements in the past 10 plus years. Like I said, everything from esports to expos and everything in between. But there has been, unfortunately, a lack of enthusiasm from the government specifically to support these kind of initiatives, coupled with the lack of care and empathy from the game companies, like the international game companies. It was like a cocktail of the perfect cocktail to not support the region, basically. So I just wanted to mention that it's not also just it's not 100% the blame falls on the game companies. It's also from the government, but it's both sides are, I feel like, to blame, like a little bit, and lack of support.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes complete sense, and it's also and I'm glad you brought it up because it's super important to be mindful of these things too, and why I think it just goes back to your initial point of what's one of the main things that people can do to better serve these audiences is just being acknowledged, because I think through constant acknowledgement can kind of places like Kuwait and everything could over time, and it might not happen right away, but over time send signals to governments, to other entities, to different cultures, and I know this is a kind of a world problem, a small one, but like there's so many people, even from a cultural perspective, and I think this is a global one personally, where people are like, "Oh, I'm working in the games industry." Like, wait, what do you do? It's like, and then they're like, "How do you make a living off that? What's your backup plan?" I mean, so many people out there have had these stories. Victoria Tron is a great example of that, because I think she went into something medical related, and her family is like, "Why are you getting out of that? Like, how are you working?" And I think she did a PAX talk a few years ago about this, and her and other people, and the same thing, where they come from a cultural background that knows nothing about games and stuff, and then when they find out, they're like, "Don't throw away your life." It's like, thanks, mom. But it's really interesting, and I'm glad you share that too, because again, I think it just comes down to more acknowledgement, more awareness, and to help like with the amplification of these things. So these support systems are becoming more prominent in different areas that don't already have them. And just to continue with that, because and the government can be a tricky one too, right? Because the government, they're the government, like they
Right.
do what they want basically.
Right.
Right. And it's just so frustrating, and a lot of times it can be so limiting, but even with those limitations over time they are going to give in. Like, I mean, come on, what we're talking about today with this industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry that continues to grow. I forget what the numbers are. Last I checked, they're like we're probably already
200 billion.
approached what.
200 billion.
200 billion. Yeah, I was way off, because it's ridiculous. There's room for everybody with those types of numbers, and it keeps growing. So the fact that these some of these governments have a hard time acknowledging them or ignoring them or whatever their reason is, it can't go unnoticed for too long. But still, it's something to be mindful of and think of. But it doesn't
Yes.
mean, even though with these limitations, it doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities out there at the least. If anything, I mean, early adopters can be it can be a really cool thing that happens in the long run. But
No, definitely. I mean, first mover advantage.
yeah, exactly. So again, I'm glad you brought that up and shared it, because again, it's an obstacle that it's not just facing for people considering these audiences. It's also an obstacle for people that for the audiences themselves. So it's kind of like it's a big global team effort here that we all got to
Yes.
like kind of pitch in to make things happen for everyone that's out there.
And to be honest, because you mentioned Square Enix previously, and I mentioned them coming to my events. I mean, the one thing that helped me with Square Enix more than any other thing was that they actually did their due diligence. They did before I even met them. They were aware of the market. I mean, obviously they weren't aware of it as after they met me, but I didn't have to struggle with explaining that USPSN accounts are used in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, for example. Like they already knew that. They were aware of that. So I would like to ask the game companies to look at their data, like deep, like not don't look just as at the accounts. Look at the IP addresses. Where are those IP addresses coming from
Yeah.
for people playing your games? Because once I was able to, there's a company. I don't know if it's called Q Games in Japan. They're the guys behind the Pixel Junk franchise. I got to know them, and I felt like I could, they had an open mind, and I said, hey guys, you guys have a following here in the Middle East, and they're like, we're Q Games, we're not like a AAA company, whatever. Like, who would know about us in the Middle East? I was like, well, just look into it, just like check IP addresses. So they did do that on a whim, like, hey, let's hear this crazy guy out, you know, and they looked at it and they found that they had a sizable fan base in the Middle East, and they even had a few YouTubers in the Middle East playing their games on a regular basis. That it convinced them for their upcoming game to be translated into Arabic.
Mm.
So there's a lot of companies that are not aware of their fan base. Even small companies, they're not aware that the fan base they have in the Middle East, and I just urge them to look into not just game sales, but IP addresses from where those games are playing, because that's probably a better indication
Yeah.
than checking accounts.
And I love that you ended with that example, because I know everyone that's listening to this, not everyone basically is going to be like, well, this doesn't really apply to me. This sounds like really big stuff. And it's not as big as you might think. I mean, the world is kind of a small place, right? And once you start thinking
We're a
about
global community.
yeah. And yeah, exactly. And we're still a global community and everything else. So it just it was just a great way to show how even any type of contribution and acknowledgement and everything else still has lots of opportunities out there for everybody, and to serve these underserved audiences, and to it's all mutually beneficial for basically all parties involved, as far as I see it.
No, you're correct. You're correct.
So, no, awesome. Well, again, I can't thank you enough for these insights and everything else, Yousif. But before we close, I need at least 3 tips, if you can,
Okay.
or suggestions on what we would like to share to our listeners today, to whether they're studios or just indie devs or whoever. What are 3 things that people should that you would recommend for anybody who's looking to kind of look for hungry audiences in global markets?
Sure. Well, like I said earlier, the most important one is just to acknowledge us with, like, something like a tweet, simple as a tweet. Like, tweet in Arabic that your game is launching. In in addition to the tweet in English or any other language that you tweet out. That is something that doesn't take much. You can even do Google Translate. It's not gonna it's gonna be pretty accurate. It's gonna be really hard to mess up saying our game is out in Google Translate.
Right. Yep.
So yeah, it's just like a sentence or two, not nothing crazy. Number 2, maybe just look up events happening in the Middle East, and just go visit those events, not even as an exhibitor, just like take a vacation and travel to an Arab country and just see how things are and how the culture is. I think once they do arrive in the country, they will have a better understanding of, oh wow, like this is a market that we neglected, and there's a huge fan base, and we should cater to them. Third, I'm not really sure. Like, honestly, I know it's like something like small and stupid, but that tweet thing is so like crucial for us, like just to be acknowledged. I'm not really sure what I would say as a third tip to, like, market in the Middle East, other than maybe localize the game in Arabic, or even have a launch party for your game, or like a specific, or oh, actually no, this is, I just remembered something. Just how you guys in the West have your holidays, such as Christmas, and there's going to be a Christmas sale, for example, right, on like PSN or Steam or what have you.
Yep.
We have our own holidays as well. We obviously don't observe Christmas, but we have our own holidays such as Eid. This it's the largest. It's our Christmas. It's the largest Islamic holiday. So maybe during Eid, you guys can tweet out, hey, we have a special Eid sale, for our games. Again, this is another form of acknowledgement, just
Yep.
as the tweet idea was. But it would be really, really cool for me to open Twitter or open PSN store or whatever and say, oh wow, this game has a sale on Eid. Oh wow, they know about us. I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's a real good one too. I think the last one, it's like no one would think that, but if you really want to kind of really serve that audience without necessarily going to a lot of taking a ton of measures that we typically
ton of
think
effort,
of.
yeah.
That's again. It's sometimes just the little things that matter, and
Exactly.
yeah. And for your second point, like looking up events happening in the Middle East and even just traveling there, just a quick example of that happening. How I actually found out and met Yousif was simply through Tanya X Short, who has been a guest on the show before, and we're in a mutual group together, and she suggested this event, and here we are now talking with Yousif today to explore these things more. But that second tip, and a great example of that is actually, I don't believe Tanya herself went to the Middle East, but and correct me if I'm wrong, Yousif. It was a member. Yes, it was.
Yes, one of the co-founders of Kitfox Games attended, and they had such a great time and great experience. And I was able to develop, the relationship with Tanya further because of their experience at my expo.
And here we are now talking to each other because of that. Like, go figure. It all connects,
Right.
folks.
Right, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Yousif. But before we go, we need some links. We need some information on where people can learn more about GX, where they can learn more about Fikra, KBR. Let's lay it out here.
Yeah. So our website is called fikraevents.com. So it's FIKRA events.com. And our social media, all our social media, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, what have you, is Fikra KW, FIKRA KW, and you'll know it's us because the logo is like a black background with a light bulb on it,
Mm-hmm.
so it's easy to make out, and you can reach us and find information about us either via the website or more specifically our social media from those two accounts.
Okay, cool. And is there any kind of ways to get in touch with you, or is that better done through the website and you'll see stuff there, or are you on social media?
The website will have the emails and everything, and there's links to the website from our social media as well. So it's all interconnected.
Okay.
So you can contact us via social media. You can contact us via the website. It's all the same, really.
Awesome. All right, so folks, please do yourselves a favor. Do all these other people a favor to reach out and find out more. There's a lot going on at these events, and again, it's going to give you this whole thing is going to give you a better understanding and mindset of all these untapped audiences, and there's so much potential in everything else. And Yousif, can't thank you enough for sharing your insight, your stories, and everything else on just really neat and different ways that we can find creative audiences in this global market. So, especially in Kuwait. So, thanks again, buddy.
And thank you as well for having me as a guest.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. If you enjoy and value the show's content, you can support us even more by going to Patreon and visiting www.patreon.com/IGM podcast and select the tier that best suits your needs. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saab for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.